focus of right now. Wilder, Fury 2, here we go.
I'm sure that most of you have heard by now, as there are very little places you can go to get away from this news, if any, that the coronavirus pandemic has effectively KO'd boxing and most all organized sports. Any public gathering that would further the spread of the virus has been postponed, has been called off, has been canceled. Social distancing, medical sepsis, good hygiene are the best weapons we have here today to combat the spread of this virus.
That's the most we could do.
The focal point has shifted from our day-to-day activities to helping to contain
and control
this pandemic. And the month of March is pretty much a wash,
for everything,
with a little over 2 weeks left.
Just about, yeah.
I have to say, it could be a while before things get back to normal. Things get back to normal in the sport of boxing. Things get back to normal in the sporting world as a whole and the day-to-day world. I think it's going to take well over 2 weeks for things to really get back to normal, I do.
Here stateside.
I mean, I think it's going to take at least a month, maybe two, before things can go back to the way they were. See, here stateside, President Donald Trump has activated a 30-day travel ban.
As of today.
From Europe to the United States, as the initial travel ban from China to the United States in an effort to contain the virus has proven unfruitful. This thing's everywhere you look. It doesn't matter where in the world you are. Normally, come here to talk about sports, a sport, the sport of boxing. But the sporting world as a whole, whether you're talking about the NBA, the NHL, or the MLB, boxing, mixed martial arts, it's all been halted. It's at a standstill as a result of this pandemic. And common sense dictates that given the response we're seeing in regards to this coronavirus
around the world,
there may be those out there who want to downplay it as being no worse than influenza, as influenza statistically claims more lives
per year
by year, than this coronavirus has so far, but that's just it. We're assessing the damage so far. I mean, common sense would dictate that given the response we're seeing to this virus globally, we're not dealing with your regular old influenza here, and it would be foolhardy to think about it in that kind of a context. You have to take this seriously. You can't relegate what's happening here to your regular old influenza or your regular old run-of-the-mill situations we're accustomed to dealing with day to day. As
this ain't that.
The NBA season doesn't get called off due to influenza, does it?
No.
The NHL, the MLB?
No.
Boxing, mixed martial arts? You think all these different sporting events get called off as a result of influenza? No. If it were influenza, the show goes on. But with this thing, the show's not going on. So that's what you need to understand. That is your indicator that what we're dealing with here is not an ordinary situation. It's an extraordinary situation that requires an extraordinary response. I'm not advocating for mass hysteria or the doom and gloom that I'm sure most of you are feeling right now. But it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be understood that when it was the Zika virus,
this ain't happened.
SARS, swine flu, H1N1, you didn't see this kind of global response, did you? Didn't get to that point to where this was what was going on. It didn't get to that point, whereas here, things are
more severe,
different. And because things are different, that is your flag, that is your indicator that you need to take the situation seriously. Don't relegate it to being no worse than influenza to allay your own fears, make yourself feel better whilst in the midst of this pandemic.
Know thyself, know thy enemy.
I've seen the kind of information being passed around, heard things said being on the ground, that the symptoms associated with this coronavirus are no worse than what you'd be dealing with if you had seasonal influenza.
Seen those talks.
That seasonal influenza statistically claims more lives than this coronavirus has so far, but we only have bits and pieces of information in regards to the coronavirus so far. We don't actually know how bad things can get and how much worse we can make them if we ourselves are ignorant to the situation and what is going on. It's going to take an active effort on the ground from everyone to exercise caution, social distancing, avoiding crowded spaces, public places that would further the spread of the virus. That if you don't need to go nowhere this weekend or the next couple of days, then perhaps you shouldn't.
Yeah.
That you hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. Even if you yourself feel that there's something else going on here, that they're just causing mass hysteria to stimulate the economy.
Maybe you're right.
Maybe you are. But you should still operate under the assumption that the situation is as severe as it is being described. You don't want to find out you were wrong, do you?
Do you?
You don't want to be proven wrong.
Do you?
Do you? I mean, that's the takeaway, at least for me, that no matter what you think is actually going on, you don't want to be the one to find out that you were wrong about everything and it's as bad or worse as everyone is saying it is. There are many people out there
willfully ignorant,
resting their laurels on the assumption that if you are already in good health, then you have very little to worry about. As people that are already in good health, for those individuals, the virus is non-lethal, and those individuals are, more often than not, based on the available information, expected to recover. There's that, and that may allay some fears, but that should not open the door to treat the situation so cavalier, okay? There's a reason that all these multi-million-dollar sporting industries are bringing their events to a screeching halt, costing them millions to combat the spread of this virus. There's a reason they're doing this, and I don't think it's because they ain't got nothing to worry about. Think about the travel and tourism industry. What is this costing them? It is there you find the reality of things, that this cannot be ignored, and it must be taken seriously, as those affected by it the most have no choice but to take it seriously, so you must take it seriously as well. I'm not expecting things to get back to normal anytime in 2 to 3 weeks. I'm not. I think it could very well be May before we get back in the swing of things. Things go back to normal and we can get back to discussing the sport we love, as well as, how this has affected our day-to-day lives. I do happen to think that unless promising information is released and thereby made available to the populace at large,
nationally and around the world,
the month of April could be a wash in all the ways that the month of March is turning out to be a wash. It could take that long to get a fix on this thing, to get things under control. That is the takeaway here, folks, that if those out there who are being questioned the most by this pandemic are taking it seriously, then you've little to no choice to not take it seriously yourself. I'm sure that the opportunists, the conspiracy theorists, are going to take this as an opportunity to spread information as a means to turn over a profit. That's always the case, pandemic or no pandemic. But the takeaway for the people on the ground, the people like you and me, the takeaway for us is to treat the situation with as much reverence, as much seriousness as is required to maintain our own health, our own safety, and the safety of our loved ones. Take this as an opportunity to just sit at home with the missus.
Reacquaint yourselves.
Spend some time together.
Yeah.
Fuck your wife. Fuck hard.
Yeah.
Take in some movies at home. Take up a hobby. Read some books, Watch some classic boxing matches. Reacquaint yourselves with the sport in a way that the constant influx of boxing news sometimes prevents you from doing. As I've no doubts in the coming weeks and maybe the next 2 months,
maybe longer,
boxing news itself will slow. There won't be much to report on, as there won't be very many, if any, fights taking place. Exercise caution in your day-to-day comings and goings, limiting the amount of surfaces you actually touch. Keep your hands in your pockets
if you can.
Exercise medical asepsis and cleanliness, good hygiene. Wash your fucking hands when you use the bathroom. Wash your fucking hands when you don't use the fucking bathroom, because, ladies and gentlemen, this situation is not to be ignored. We can get through this thing.
if we maintain a level head, keep our composure, and do our part to prevent the spread of this coronavirus.
I think we can get through this, and I think we will, so long as we put a brave face on and exercise better judgment. The fear of the unknown, which is often worse than the fear of what is known. The devil that you know, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of doom and gloom in the air.
There is.
But we've got to put on a brave face.
We have to.
We've got to exercise courage. We can get through it because with courage, preparation, and a little bit of luck.
Luck often enough will save a man if his courage holds.
Thus, not fear the unknown.
The Allfather rolled the skein of your life a long time ago. Go and hide in a hole if you wish. But you won't live 1 instant longer. Your fate is fixed. Fear profits man nothing.
It will not be through fear and fear alone that we combat this virus, these tumultuous times. Education and preparation are your most effective weapons. Thus, you must use them.
We must all use them.
To secure the victory.
We now turn our attention to what news is available to report, what news is available to discuss. Trainer, Canelo knows Callum Smith is a serious threat to him. The article reads, Smith recently lashed out because Canelo and his handlers made him a single offer, which he rejected. And then Smith never heard from Canelo and his team again. But Saunders, who also rejected the initial offer that Canelo's team presented, was then given a much improved offer to eventually get an agreement in place on the financial terms. Canelo's trainer, Eddie Reynoso, has told Eddie Hearn he never wanted no part of Callum Smith, although he said to me he would do. Gallagher told Sky Sports. He knows his fighter and Callum Smith just isn't somebody that Canelo wants to fight. You can never say Canelo ducks anyone. He's fought every man and his dog. But what I'm saying is, they know Callum Smith is a huge, serious threat for him. It's just a shame, really, that the fight isn't happening. I think to myself, one, it's Callum Smith's size. He's young, he's hungry, he can punch with either hand, he's got a good inside fighting game, and he's a huge problem. And I think what these quotes accent in regards to Callum Smith, in regards to Joe Gallagher, is the kind of attitude that I've been talking about in my previous videos, that these guys, they just feel they're too good for every fucking thing. I mean, you're basically insinuating that Canelo wants no parts of your guy, yet it was Canelo Alvarez who made an offer to your guy, where he could have made no offer at all.
If he were trying to skirt around you.
You go in there against John Ryder, you look like shit. So you can turn around after that and try to tell the boxing community at large that Canelo Alvarez don't want no parts of you? After rejecting an offer from Canelo Alvarez. You'll excuse me for saying so, that maybe Joe Gallagher and Callum Smith have a lot of delusions of grandeur.
Yeah, I think so.
Of course, Callum Smith didn't look good in that fight. He could not contain that situation involving John Ryder. And John Ryder, God bless him, he's no Canelo Alvarez. You talk about the styles of the fighters, and I discussed this in passing. What makes Billy a trickier opponent for a Canelo Alvarez, and what makes Callum Smith an easier guy to read? Callum Smith, for all his imposing size and punching power, he's an orthodox fighter with a very conventional style. Very hard, straight punches. But these straight punches, which are many times Callum Smith's money punches, these kind of shots are the kind of shots that Canelo Alvarez is quite accustomed to working around. Slipping and hooking or bobbing and weaving. He can get around those shots, close that gap, and work the taller guys midsection.
The body.
Canelo Alvarez, being a smaller fighter with the lower center of gravity at that range, would actually be quite difficult for Callum to deal with. I mean, if you struggled with John, why wouldn't you struggle with Canelo Alvarez? Both those guys have got comparable dimensions, and you couldn't keep John out of his sweet spot. But you're going to keep Canelo out of his?
Give me a break.
It's not a triangle theory, you know? John Ryder is not a common opponent between Canelo Alvarez and Callum Smith, so it's not a triangle theory.
It's not.
It's more along the lines of gauging a fighter's performance against a fighter with similar dimensions, comparable dimensions to a Canelo Alvarez. Because John Ryder, as far as super middleweights go, he's on the smaller, stumpier end of the spectrum. The same as Canelo Alvarez. And John Ryder, he really gave a good account of himself against Callum. So what do you think Canelo would do against Callum? I'm not trying to discredit Callum Smith's abilities so much as characterize what he does and doesn't bring to the table. the bottom line here is, if Joe Gallagher and Callum Smith are saying what they're saying, that's just a case of sour grapes. That's what it is. I mean, when you're Canelo Alvarez and you got 8 or 9 guys lined up around the block trying to get a fight with you, and you pick one of those guys, the other 7 guys, well, they're not going to be happy about it, and they're going to be saying things along the lines of what Joe Gallagher and Callum Smith are saying. You know, you can't please everybody. Everybody can't win the sweepstakes at the same time.
And what makes it worse is you guys actually rejected an offer from this guy. Whereas if it were the way you're telling it, that he was so focused on avoiding Callum Smith, he would have never made you no offer at all. Those are the facts. Look, I think of Billy Joe Saunders and Callum Smith as being inconsequential opponent options. That one guy is just as credible an opponent as the other guy, because they're both undefeated champions at 168 pounds. So pick your poison, whatever your preference is. But a tricky southpaw, a mobile southpaw who's a good counterpuncher, is a lot harder to read than a guy like Callum Smith, who has a very conventional, upright, textbook kind of style. He's a strong puncher who throws good straight punches, fighting out of the orthodox stance.
He's all right.
But in that way, Canelo Alvarez wouldn't have to worry about lead foot advantage, keeping his lead foot on the outside of the other guy's lead foot because the other guy is a southpaw. He wouldn't have to worry about that against Callum.
Sounds a lot like Joe Gallagher and Callum Smith are tooting their own horn because Callum is a lot bigger than Canelo, but by now, Canelo Alvarez has answered most of the questions in regards to how he would fare, how he would look against a naturally bigger guy. You know, a statuesque guy, like a Daniel Jacobs, like a Rocky Fielding, like a Sergey Kovalev. Some of these guys have very educated jabs, just as, if not more educated jabs than Callum's. And Canelo looked good in all of those fights.
I'm not a fan of that guy, I'm just being honest. Those were all decisive victories, every single one of them. So you'll excuse me for saying so, but I actually happen to think that Canelo picked the trickier guy with the harder style to read and deal with. Callum's a good fighter. It's not that he's not a good fighter, but he doesn't bring anything to the table that Canelo hasn't seen before.